My guest is Dov Waxman. He's a professor at the City University of New York. Welcome to the show, Dov.
Thank you.
I'm pleased to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
I want to talk about the Palestinians, but I want to get a greater overview because lots of countries have minorities. Lots of countries give minorities language privileges or don't. How do the Israelis stand up in a comparative context?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think it's important to put this issue in a comparative framework because I think it is, as you say, one of the kind of global challenges of our time is dealing with the demands of ethnic and national minorities. In a regional comparative framework, if you put Israel within the Middle East region, it compares very favorably to other countries in the region. I mean, in general, in the Middle East,
you're talking about the Egypt and the
I'm
Copts.
talking about Egypt and the Copts, Iran and Baha'is, for instance.
Oh, well, they're persecuted.
Right, exactly. Even Turkey and its Kurds. I think Israel historically has had a better track record.
So the Kurds aren't their language isn't recognized by Kurds.
Well, there is now. I mean, partly under pressure from the European Union, there has been some significant shifts in the liberalization of Turkey's policy toward the Kurds. So, from a situation historically where Turkey basically completely denied the existence of a Kurdish minority, and it was actually a crime to speak Kurdish or to educate your children in Kurdish or even to give them Kurdish names. And so, you know, compared to Turkey, Israel was much more liberal and accommodating of its Arab minority. Today, Turkey has made considerable moves in the direction of liberalization. Israel, on the other hand, is I would argue, moving in the opposite direction.
Oh, it is. I see.
And I think, in fact, there is a reversal of progress in Israel's case.
When did that shift take place?
I would really date it back to 2000 and to October 2000 events as they've become known and what's taken place since then.
Some of our audience won't know what happened in October, so just elaborate.
So in the first week of October 2000, just a few days after the second Palestinian Intifada broke out, large-scale demonstrations were held by Palestinian citizens of Israel in Arab towns and villages across the country. And in the course of these demonstrations, riots broke out, looting occurred, rocks, stones were thrown at Israeli police, also at Israeli civilians. And this is turned into what's been described as perhaps the closest the Palestinian Arab minority in Israel ever came to kind of a rebellion. In essence, the reaction to that was from the Israeli Jewish majority one of great concern and anxiety. For the first time, really, many of them realized that these Arabs who they'd always referred to as Arab Israelis or Israeli Arabs were in fact Palestinian and did identify themselves as Palestinian and sympathize with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And that has really kind of exacerbated Israeli Jewish concerns about the loyalty of approximately 1/5 of Israel's population, of this Palestinian Arab minority. And since that time, you've seen a kind of growing discussion within Israel about the problem, as Israeli Jews often refer to it, of the Arab minority, concerns whether they constitute a fifth column within Israel. And I think that has really led to some, as I say, a kind of, in law and in social attitudes, a regression from what happened.
Let's differentiate between social attitudes. Clearly, if you begin to perceive a group as a fifth column, that's one thing. But what institutional measures would you say in law and practice have illustrated this regression, as you would call it?
Well, most recently, there has been the so-called loyalty bills, as they've been known, the introduction. This is in the present Knesset since 2009 elections, of bills that essentially are tying the acquisition of an identity card, which is mandatory to have an Israeli identity card if you're a citizen of Israel, the citizenship itself, and as well as entry into the Knesset, to a declaration of loyalty to Israel, not just the state of Israel, but Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and the Zionist values.
But if I can stop you there, these were bills that were proposed and introduced, but nothing came of them, did they? In the sense of institutional practice, except as a revelation of an attitude by some groups.
Well, the fact that's true, and the bills have ultimately not entered into legislation, but the very fact that they've been introduced, I think, indicates the changing political climate within Israel. I mean, there have been some actual laws passed.
Which ones, for example?
Well, specifically in terms of the political parties law and the ability to stand as a Knesset candidate. Both of these things now are restricted to essentially, you cannot stand as a candidate for the Knesset or run as a political party if you oppose Israel's identity as a Jewish and democratic state.
But you know yourself that in the past there's been other efforts in that direction. The Supreme Court has made rulings. Don't you expect the same thing to happen again?
To strike down that legislation?
Well, I don't know. I don't know enough about that area, but that's been a pattern where it doesn't stand. But the real question is what the trend line is, I think, more than whether the law stands or does not stand. Because there's always been a group trying to repress, especially when you had Palestinians in Knesset who pledged loyalty to the PLO. You had those kinds of events and I remember interviewing people, and that was a crisis in the 90s already.
There's always been, I mean, historically, the issue of Palestinian minority within Israel, and particularly the support of its elected leadership and non-elected leadership for Palestinians elsewhere, has always been an issue. As long as there's been a historic Jewish-Arab conflict, it will remain an issue. But I do think that, as I said, in recent years, there has been a deterioration, a serious deterioration in these relations. One of the things that has changed is in the attitudes of Israeli Jewish society. Surveys, polls that have taken that indicate there's a declining tolerance for the kinds of dissent that historically have been, tolerated, or I mean, never welcomed. It's always been a kind of somewhat uncomfortable toleration, but there is greater restrictions. I mean, you've seen in recent years, for instance, not only has there been expressions that say essentially that it is illegitimate to make these criticisms, and that there should be actual legal restrictions upon it, but also the prosecution and indictment of various Arab legislatures. Now, I can understand where some of this is coming from, but I think we have to be very careful about being complacent about any democratic situation, particularly the rights of a minority within it.
Well, I want to look at the other side of it. What about issues of land, of more equal treatment of schools and education? Which direction are those practices going? I'm talking about really domestic concerns, support for the municipalities in infrastructure, all those issues that have been around for a while. Which direction are they going in?
It's a very mixed picture. I think on the one hand, there is a growing awareness and recognition within Israeli Jewish society and within the Israeli political establishment about the neglect and discrimination that Arab communities in Israel have suffered from. And there is, I think, more of a desire now to rectify that. There's a realization that a situation of kind of inequality between Jews and Arabs within Israel is a problem for Israel's future stability. And I think that is something that the present government and its predecessors do recognize and want to act upon. But all too often there is a disconnect between their realization of it and the actual policies that have been implemented. So for instance, one of the biggest issues concerns housing, the lack of adequate housing in Arab towns. Now there's an awareness that this is an issue and something has to be done about it, but there is still a shortage of this, It's still very difficult for Arabs to get construction permits, to build new housing. And as a result, you're seeing Arab families and young couples moving into Jewish towns. And as a result,
that may be good in some sense.
It could be good.
We have to end there though, Dov. I want to thank you. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you. My pleasure.